Hello, everyone. I'm Christian van Nieuwerburgh, and it's my great delight to be talking to my good friend, colleague, mentor, and the person I've learned more from than anyone else in around coaching and education. And this is part of the series called Coaching, Mentoring, and Professional Learning Conversations. And this is the first of a weekly series of webinars that we'll be running. So Jim, wonderful to be talking to you.
I'm always grateful for the chance to talk with you, Christian. And so it's great to see you too.
And, the truth is, I love talking to Jim, and we do have conversations like this. So I just wanted to let everyone know who's on the call live that the plan is we're just going to have a conversation based on how we got into coaching and education and what we've learned from one another. And we'll probably talk for maybe 30, 40 minutes. And then the plan will be to hand over for any questions. So if any questions pop into your mind as we're talking, please feel free to use the chat box just to type the questions out there. We won't address the questions as they emerge, but when we get to that point in the conversation, we'll have a look down the questions and address some of those. So, Jim, can you tell us, can we start off just by thinking about how you became interested in this arena of coaching and education?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that, and I just wanted to acknowledge, as you and I both discussed before we came on, that this is a really a crazy time, and we know that people have a lot of pressing concerns, and both organizations, Growth Coaching International and the Instructional Coaching Group, we're trying to get as many things on line as we can to provide support. And just to let people know you're not alone. And if we can help, there are a lot of ways to reach out to us on our website, through Twitter. Anything we can do, we'll do our best. I'm going to be doing a answering questions thing on Facebook, which I'll publicize later on. And what I've said internally with our group is right now our job is to provide support and help people. And so I just want to acknowledge that up front. And honestly, I've had multiple conversations about addressing the challenges we're facing, and I'm looking forward to a bit of a distraction with this conversation. So I hope people will forgive me if we spend a little less time on Corona and a little more time on the long-term history. So did you want to respond to that before I go on, Christian?
Thank you so much, Jim. That's excellent to acknowledge that. And I want to acknowledge educators right now who are, we hear a lot about health professionals, and we're very grateful to them. They are on the front line. And I think educators are also on the front line right now. And there's been so much disruption. So I wanted also to echo what you've said, Jim, about what we're trying to do at GCI, but acknowledge educators and leaders and people within educational organizations and departments for the amazing work they're doing during this time. And like you, Jim, I'd like us to distract ourselves by reflecting on coaching and education for the next 30, 40 minutes. So let's go back to what moved you towards coaching and education initially, Jim?
Well, the funny thing is, we didn't really come to coaching. We weren't thinking of it as coaching initially. And, our understanding of the concept of coaching continues to evolve. But what happened was I was teaching kids with learning disabilities, and I got these teaching strategies that really worked. And from the University of Kansas, I was living in Toronto. And then I became a trainer, and I started to do workshops, and the workshops were useless. They had no impact at all on practice, and I think they were actually kind of dehumanizing. You know, I was like, you have to do it this way. This is what the research says, and didn't really listen to people. And so I knew that wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do. But at that time, Michael Fullan was at the University of Toronto. He was the director of, first off, University of Toronto Schools, and then he became the director of OISE. And so I studied with him. I took a course with him, and then and he was gracious enough to give me independent study. And I would meet him over breakfast, and he would suggest books to read. And I read, at that point, he was writing Change Forces. So I read a few chapters of that as he was writing it. And I read everything he'd done up until that point. He had a whole series on what principals need to do and teachers need to do. And of course, the meaning of educational change. And that got me thinking differently. And then he had me read a bunch of other books like Margaret Wheatley and Peter Senge and Thomas Sergiovanni, Seymour Saracen. So I read all of this stuff. He gave me many things to read. And then the other thing he did too is he connected me with people. So he gave me a chance to meet Stephanie Hirsh and Rick Stiggins to look at formative assessment, Stephanie Hirsh to study professional development. And so my time with Michael gave me sort of a bigger picture of what professional development could be. And I went to Kansas to do my doctorate, and I knew I wanted to follow up, and I was really influenced by Senge at the time and the whole concept of dialogue. And I knew my professional development was crappy. It wasn't doing any good. It was a waste of time and a waste of money. The strategies were great, but the professional development had zero impact. So then I just became obsessed with the question of what's it take. And the first study was on the partnership approach. Compared a couple workshops. That ended up being my dissertation. And then we had this position we called a learning consultant. We had this grant back in about 1996. And then Gear Up was a big thing and continues to be a big thing in the United States, but it provided us with funding for studying what we called instructional collaborators starting in 1999. And then about 2004, I shifted to the term instructional coach just because everybody said, well, you're coaches. So we said, I guess we are. And so I wrote a paper for Journal of Staff Development, the first paper on the topic. And then I wrote instructional coaching, and it kind of evolved. But we used the term coach almost recklessly. You know, it was just the term because we talked about reading coaches, literacy coaches, math coaches at that time. So we said an instructional coach. And then as I worked with you in particular, I was kind of like a whole new world. You know, if you had a Venn diagram, you have a big circle I didn't know about. And that's the world of, you know, what coaching means and what much broader context. But that's how it all kind of came to be. How about with you? How did you come in to get into this?
Well, this is a really great to hear how you got into it. And I always appreciate, Jim, how humble you are. So I would probably believe that the professional development sessions you ran weren't crappy. But I do acknowledge the impact thing. And I think that's probably where I got interested as well. I was working in the United Kingdom in an education department for local government. And we were delivering a lot of professional development as well. And for educators. And my role was a quality assurance role. How well are we doing with these courses that we're running all across the West Midlands of the United Kingdom? And we were getting rave reviews from teachers coming onto our one-day courses. And as part of the review process, I was kind of curious and I wanted to know what impact it's having. So it's similar to what you're saying, in that what I did was I went back to educators who'd been on our courses a year previous. And I picked the ones that said the course was amazing. And when I get back to school, I'm going to do all of these things. And I contacted the schools and I asked to speak to those people. And I asked, I reminded them, you came onto this course a year ago. You told us it was amazing. And I said, I'm just curious, this is my role. Can you tell me how it's impacted on your practice? And it was almost universally, hasn't had any impact or a tiny amount of impact. And I guess that's when I thought, well, what is it? What could we do that would ensure greater kind of implementation or impact in schools? And that's when I wasn't sure coaching was the right thing, but people were talking about it within my organization. I trained to become a coach myself, and then started doing the work, coaching educators, delivering professional development, following it up with coaching. And there's some research to show that that can be effective. And the next step for me was going and working at the University of East London. And it was my good colleague, Professor Jonathon Passmore, who invited me along because of my interest in coaching and education. And this is where we connect up, Jim, because Jonathon said to me, could you run a module on coaching and education? And could you find the readings we need to do? And that's where I came across your book on coaching, the initial book. And then by doing further exploration, came along onto instructional coaching. And that was again, just like you said, a huge new world opened up for me, because what we were doing was coaching school leaders, and we were providing coaching after training events. But the whole world of empowering educators by training them to coach and then support other educators, that's what kind of opened up for me. So, so I guess it might be interesting for us just kind of reflect on the kind of the meeting of when we first met, because that was a memorable moment for me.
That's what I wanted to ask about. So we were at the University of East London, and it was a conference. I think it may have been the first coaching and education conference in Europe. I could be wrong, but I think it might have been. I'm certainly pretty sure it was in the UK. Jonathon heard about me because of Michael Fullan. So Jonathon asked Michael to write a chapter about coaching, and Michael was gracious enough to send me the invitation, and so I wrote the chapter. But when I met you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were doing sort of executive coaching and educational coaching. And I remember we went off to this sort of side room at a break, and you said, I'm really thinking I want to focus my attention exclusively on education. So my question is, and you have, so my question is, what led to that decision? Yeah. Because in many ways, if you were being selfish, you'd probably make more money as an executive coach than an educational coach. So what was going on there in your thinking?
What a lovely question. And so nice to be asked this question by you, Jim, because I was genuinely inspired by you and the work you do. That's 100% true. And the other turning point moment for me was being invited to Lawrence, Kansas, which you graciously did. And when I got to Lawrence, Kansas for one of your intensive 5-day events, I was amazed to see so many educators there, passionate educators, learning about coaching, excited about going back into school. So that's one part of it. The other more personal part is I started off as a teacher myself. You know, that was the first job that I did, was as a substitute teacher, and then became a teacher. My father was an educator. So I think my heart's always been in education. And, you know, I've done lots of different things, but I've always come back to education. But probably the combination of that conference, which we did call the first Coaching and Positive Psychology and Education Conference, I think it was 2011.
Yeah, 2010 or 2011, around about then. I looked it up just the other day, but I can't remember exactly. But it's around that time for sure.
I think it might have been 2011. It was that event and that side conversation, then followed up with the visit to Lawrence. And I do remember, Jim, I thought, wow, I get a chance to spend some time with Jim talking about this. We were walking somewhere, and I asked you, I said, do you think it's possible just for me to completely focus on education? And you said some encouraging words. So that's part of it. But what reflections do you have from that conference? Is there anything else that stood out for you at that event?
Well, it was an honor to be there. There were so many heroes of mine. You, Jonathan. I was fortunate to hear Sir John Whitmore speak. Who's had such huge pioneering impact on coaching. I felt that the country, the United Kingdom, not just England, was sort of ready for coaching. Like they needed instructional coaching, but I wasn't sure that how it was going to take off. So at the time I was encouraged but curious about where things would go. And I think I sort of feel the same way about the United Kingdom now, that it has great potential to embrace instructional coaching, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. That's why I'm really hoping that Dr. Lofthouse's conference happens in November, and if we postpone it so we can start to talk about what instructional coaching might really look like.
That's wonderful. And I think Professor Lofthouse is on the call, which is just wonderful. And because one of the other things that our initial conversation allowed us to do was to bring together all of the learning that had been happening in North America and the work that had been going on in the UK. And Rachel was and is still one of the leading researchers when it comes to coaching and mentoring in education. So that was wonderful. And just reflecting, it was wonderful that Sir John Whitmore was there. So I really appreciated that opportunity of hearing him. And the other highlight for me was, I think we just on the spur of the moment, was it that trip we actually were able to go to Paris, drive to Paris together. And we had some
that was a different trip. That was the other time I came. We did sort of a UK tour. So we presented in Edinburgh, Wales, and various parts of the United Kingdom. And then you asked me to come and teach an afternoon with your class. And this was right before the Olympics in London. And so there was a lot of excitement around University of East London because it's kind of close to where a lot of the housing was going to be for the Olympics. In fact, I stayed in one of those places. And then I said, but I've never been anywhere other than the United Kingdom. I'd love to go to Paris. So you drove me to Paris, and I got to have my first Paris experience. And it was wonderful. I remember we just had such great conversations, listening to that nostalgia radio station the whole way.
It was great. And that brings me on to in terms of my learning about coaching and education through my interactions with you and then Instructional Coaching Group. I think it was on that drive because we had a chance to talk about instructional coaching and how it all fits alongside other forms of coaching that I had included in that book called Coaching and Education. The one thing I still remember, and I'd like you to say a bit more about this, and the learning that I've taken was you had such a clear and deeply rooted conviction about making sure that the coaching was working towards student-centered goals. And that was a huge learning moment for me to hear that and to hear the passion and conviction you had for it. So can you say more about the idea of putting the student at the heart of this work?
Yeah, and I'd like to say one more thing too after that. We didn't start out with that idea. We started out, in fact, instructional coaching, the book Instructional Coaching is more about coaches helping teachers learn teaching strategies.
Right.
There isn't really goals stated in the book Instructional Coaching. The partnership principles are there, and there's kind of an overview of a lot of other things like communication part that became better conversations, leaders, which is going to be a new book. But But just in our work, as we were doing research, and we had a couple different studies, one in Beaverton, Oregon, in the around 2008, 2009, 2010, and then one in Othello, Washington. It just became clear that we needed goals. And Michelle Harris, who's a consultant for us, was one of the ones who led the thinking. And Michelle said, we should have goals. I mean, it would work better if it was goals. So then we tried SMART goals, and SMART goals didn't work very well because it's pretty hard to put a time limit on something you can put a time limit if you're the only variable. So if I wanted to alphabetize my books, I could say I'm going to have that done by April 1st or something, because I'm the only variable. But if I'm going to try to create an inspired and motivated group of students, pretty hard to say, and I'll do it by April 1st. So, and then as we read things like Heath and Heath's books on change, and Heidi Grant Halverson and some other sort of meta books about goal setting and change, it became really clear the goal had to be emotionally compelling. And then we just realized that if it's not a student-focused goal, if it's a teacher-focused goal, you don't know if it works. I mean, you could implement a teacher-focused goal and hit the goal, but did it have any impact on kids? And then on top of it, the student-focused goal becomes an objective standard for excellence. So you can't really implement a strategy in a crappy way and have it have a positive impact on kids. I suppose you could, but chances are you're going to have to do it well to have it work. So that meant we didn't have to go there and tell people how to do it the right way. The goal became the method of ensuring quality. And it's the teacher's goal. They want to hit the goal, so we're just helping them achieve the goal. So it all kind of evolved as we did this research we did, what we call lean design research. And it just kind of grew out of that. But we didn't start with goals at all, and then eventually we said we have to have student-focused goals.
Yeah, that was such important learning for me, Jim, because one of the things I was asked, as I've focused more on coaching and education, is, well, how is coaching and education different from coaching in other sectors, like the healthcare sector or government sector or private sector? And I didn't really have a very convincing answer initially. My sense was the context is different. Education is a little bit different from other sectors. And so my initial response was, look, actually coaching and education it's about the purpose of the conversation is learning and development, where it might not always be that in other sectors. That's not a very convincing answer either, because you could argue that even in the health sector or anywhere else, there's still learning and development going on. But I think when we landed on the idea, and so what we say now, and this is with our good colleague, John Campbell, when the three of us wrote about the global framework for coaching and mentoring in education, we put student success and well-being at the heart of it. So what I can say now, when people say, well, what is coaching and education? I can say coaching and education is different, because the main purpose, the desired outcome is better professional conversations between educators and between educators and students and administrators and leaders. So better conversations within the system that ultimately lead to student success and well-being. And for me, that is unique. And I think that's what coaching and education is about.
Yeah, I think if kids aren't learning more or feeling safer in school or having a better well-being, I was going to say not a sense of well-being, but they truly are living more healthy, mentally and physically healthy lives. If that's not happening, what's the point of the coaching? I suppose you could save people time. I don't want to diminish the importance of teacher well-being in this process too, but coaching should actually be something that increases teacher efficacy. So it should lead to better teacher we won't get changes in what's happening with kids unless we respect the teachers. But I wanted to talk about that paper, because I think it's an important thing about you. People are probably going to get sick of all this positive comments from me about you, but I really think you're quite exceptional in terms of what you do, but this is a good example of the way of something you accomplished. So we were going to write this chapter where we talk about the portal, and I have what I call dialogical approach to coaching, and you have what I would call a facilitative approach to coaching. And basically what I wrote back eventually is we're going back and forth trying to talk about coaching and education. And I'm like, but your definition doesn't include my way of looking at it. And I probably had a little selfishness involved too, you know. And to your credit, you said, no, and I said, let's just drop it. You know, we're never going to agree. Let's just move on. You do it your way, we'll do it our way. And you said, no, I think it's important that we work this through and think it through and engage in an ongoing process of reflective conversations back and forth. And I really think that's one of the professionally most important things that's happened to me in the last 10 years, because in moving through our differences, I feel we've got mutual respect for these different approaches. We recognize each approach has its place, and I'm a better coach on a number of levels because of watching you, because of learning about the facilitative approach. And it wouldn't have happened if it had just been up to me, it wouldn't have happened. It took your sort of faith in our ability to learn together and your calmness in approaching it. So I'll always be grateful for that. And it was a great model for me on what collegiality should look like, that we can work through our differences and learn from the process.
That's so kind of you to say, Jim. And I agree that was, so this is the chapter, it's in a book, the Springer book. I've got it on my shelf somewhere.
Yeah, I had to pay for mine. You got yours for free.
That was a really important chapter for me as well. But I think, and this probably applies to all the educators on this call as well, I think if we focus in on what it's really all about, then it's worth sticking with it. And the faith in the process that I think I've learned through coaching, because that's all about, believing that if we follow this process, good things will emerge. So it was a really great conversation. It's helped us to learn from one another. Another great point of learning, what I've learned about coaching, particularly through the interactions with you, Jim, is the partnership principles. So the partnership principles really, really resonated with me when I first saw them. And I thought, wow, this is clear, it's helpful, it helps us to understand how to be collegiate, so that it's how to be a good colleague almost, those partnership principles. And one of the things that I was able to do with those partnership principles, and I'd like to get your perspective on this. I was able to say that when I'm working with schools or colleges or universities, I was able to say, these partnership principles aren't just for the conversation. The partnership principles also apply to if you want to implement coaching in your institution, your organization. And I've said to them, please use the partnership principles as a checklist, so that when you're rolling out, and we use this word a lot, rolling out coaching or introducing coaching, I was saying, use these partnership principles as a guide in order to implement any coaching initiative. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say, often I imagine you hear the same thing. People will say to me, well, what do you do about people who resist coaching?
Yeah.
And I have a very funny understanding of that term, because I really think if I'm coaching effectively, resistance doesn't really make sense as a term, because I'm helping that person accomplish their goals. And, if someone's helping me do what I most want to do, there probably shouldn't be resistance, at least not to the process. That's a little more sophisticated than that, but it's more like a misalignment, And so to me, if you step back, if you're experiencing something like resistance, now people come with histories, and they see you through their limited, every human being has a limited perspective, and they see you through the history, and you might represent things to them, And they're probably, a little emotionally spent already just by virtue of how complex the job is. But I think the principles sort of, they give you a diagnostic tool. I wonder if they're not really having a meaningful, if they don't really believe they have choice. I wonder if they see me as putting myself up here and putting them down there. I wonder if they feel I don't want to hear their voice, or I don't want to engage in dialogue. And Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I just reread it because I'm writing this book where I'm going back through all the things and putting it all in one place. He says that, he said dialogue, which is one of the sort of the mode of discourse of the partnership approach. He said it depends on certain conditions. One of them is humility. If we show up arrogant, we're not really going to have a lot of people who want to talk to us. We take all the air out of the room, so to speak. Second thing he says is faith, which is I communicate that I believe in this other person. I have confidence in them. I see the good in them, and they can tell that I see the good in them. And the third thing is love, which he says is an attitude of benevolence. And he says when people know that we're approaching them with humility, and we really believe in them, and we really want what's best for them. It's not a trick. It's not rhetoric. It's a genuine desire that I'm here to do what's best for you. When people can see those things embodied in our actions and our words, he said, then trust will follow. But if any of those things are missing and people feel that we're only interested in ourselves, or we're full of ourselves, or we don't believe in them, trust isn't going to be there. And to me, that's, in a nutshell, that's the partnership approach. It's, I do see the good in you, and I'm here for you. And this is not about me at all. It's about doing something bigger. Maybe it's sometimes more important to talk about kids. When those things are in place, then trust is. And it's easy to say that, and it's harder not to take things personally, for example, when push comes to shove. But that's the deal. And so if people are having a hard time working with me, if there's a misalignment and you can feel, actually there's studies that show now if we were in alignment for coaching that our brain waves should be looking the same. There's this real sense of connection when coaching is working. And that if that's not there, I would say the partnership principles provide a diagnostic tool to look at that.
That's a great way of doing it. And I think that applies in organizational context as well. So I think it applies to the one-to-one resistance, and also maybe applies to organizational hesitation about embracing some of these things. A lot of those things apply. And, there's the word resistance. The other word that I've kind of pushed back against recently is the term uncoachable.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes up a lot. What if somebody's not coachable, or are some people uncoachable? And I think I'm aligning with what the kind of the sentiment that you've just shared, which is I think that's probably an unhelpful term to start with, as somebody being uncoachable. And the word that I like to use instead is to think about readiness. So, but I do think sometimes people might not be ready for coaching. It's just means it's not the right time for them. So, but I guess we're both saying that it's about if there is if the coaching isn't working, it's that bringing that curious lens to it to figure out what is it that's needed. So in my case, I'm thinking, what can we do maybe to increase readiness?
Mm-hmm.
An educator is actually saying, Christian, this isn't the right time for it. I just haven't got the right headspace, or I've got so many other things going on. So my view is, if an educator is saying, I'm not ready to be coached, I'm thinking they're probably right. And, the respectful way of interacting is to say, okay, well, let me know when you're ready and come back and work on this. So I think that ties into what we've been saying. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I've been reading this book right now, revisiting. I think there's a third edition. This is my old edition, but Motivational Interviewing. And Miller and Rollnick say that people are always motivated. It's just they may not be motivated for the things we want them to be motivated for. It's not a lack of motivation. And they say motivation in a direction comes from a discrepancy between where I am and where I want to get to. And so they talk about a smoker who went to pick up his daughter at school, but he couldn't go on the school, and it was raining, a really miserable rain. And he stayed in his car to smoke his cigarette, even though his daughter was out in the rain, because he was so addicted to smoking. And when he realized what was going, he said, that's got to change.
Yeah.
But what Miller and Rollnick say is that what happens is there's ambivalence. So, and sometimes that involves defense mechanisms. So yes, I want my kids to really learn, but we develop narratives that explain away the problem. And so if I'm going to change, I have to let go of my narrative, which has got me through the situation. And so it's not so much that I'm uncoachable, it's I'm ambivalent about the change. Because the pleasure I get, or at least the reassurance I get from my narrative, is such that I don't want to get it. And Keegan and Leahy say, it's like I've got my foot on the gas pedal and my foot on the brake at the same time.
That's right.
So I think, so that's why I think things like video, anything that helps people get a clear picture of current reality, and then a psychologically safe coaching conversation are going to, and I don't know how you feel about this, I'm really curious actually, but they're going to help people see the discrepancy and encourage them to change. Now, I don't want people to all be down on themselves. I really like the solution-focused and appreciative inquiry idea of focusing on strengths. But I do think, to some extent, the more we can make people aware of the discrepancy, and also clarity around a goal. Once we get more clear on the goal, that also increases the likelihood that people will be motivated.
Yeah, that's
but what they say too, is telling people they need to change is research says it's a complete waste of time.
I agree with that. And sorry I jumped in there because I got excited because it allows us to link back to Sir John Whitmore. And so his definition of coaching involved the idea of raising awareness and a sense of personal responsibility. So I think what we've just been talking about there is that awareness that person, the parent sitting in the car smoking, the awareness that came to them. I think coaching, you're right, is about creating that safe space where it can become aware of it. And for me, in coaching, frustration is our friend. So when an educator is a bit frustrated or challenged, but I think that's good because that gives us the motivation. That gives that discrepancy. And I think we probably need another conversation like this just about the term current reality, because I'd love to explore that. I think video is incredibly powerful, but whether it's the reality or that's something I'd love to have another conversation about. So maybe we can come back to that. But just to kind of bring the conversation to a bit of a close, because I see there's some questions that are popping up in the chat box, and I'd like to be able to maybe look at a few of those. I just want to reflect on the fact that another thing that I've learned from you, and this is partly the way you do things. I mean, even this is a great example in this conversation. But that really coaching is it's a professional conversation, and I think what we're trying to do with coaching and education is help educators and everybody in the school community to have better conversations. And that's why I really love the book you've written about better conversations and some of the training that you deliver around it. So just to bring this conversation to kind of a close, what are your reflections about the idea that really this is about better conversations?
Well, I didn't get a chance to say what I've learned from you, so I'm gonna sidetrack and say just a little bit about this. There's this wonderful poem, I think it's by Keats, about an explorer, and I should know who the explorer was. Many people who are listening will know, but who went across Central America and for the first time looked up and saw the Pacific Ocean all open up, and here's this whole new world he didn't even know existed. And it's a beautiful poem, which I can't quote, but I've always been struck by that, what it must have been like to see this, the Pacific, for the first time, first, European to see it. And it's probably a little hyperbole, but there's a sense in which that's how I feel about our relationship, that there's this whole world of coaching that we didn't even know about. I didn't know about solution-focused coaching or appreciative inquiry. I didn't know about all the people you're connected with, and I didn't know about your work. And so what you've been able to help us do is, and by us, I mean all the people at the Instructional Coaching Group, is see how what we do fits into the world of coaching. And I do believe there's a place, but I think it's a different place because we came at it, you and I came at it from different perspectives. You came at it from coaching. I came at it from how do we get these practices implemented. And so, and I would say the thing I've learned the most from you is I've learned how to be an effective coach. Watching you modeling coaching has been incredibly helpful because you ask the question, you let the person answer, there's no distractions, you wait as long as it takes for them to answer, you create that safe space for them to think that you talk about. And having the model of what you do in my mind when I coach has been extremely helpful. So that's what I've learned. Basically, I've learned how to be a coach from you in the traditional sense of what a coach is. In terms of conversations, I think the whole thing we do as people who study growth and development is we wrestle with the fact that we aren't able to do exactly what we want to do. And so we have a vision of how a teacher, I say, to teach is to be guilty. It's just baked in. You want to reach every student and you're not going to reach every student. And at the end of the day, if 27 out of 29 kids have learned, the two you're going to think about is drive home and the two who are not learning. And I think in a sense, that's not just teaching, that's growth and that's learning, because I have a long way to go to be the kind of communicator I want to be. But I'm better than I was. I can see I've improved, and I've had some pretty profound learning experiences just recently where I realized there's things I need to work on, particularly non-verbally. So I think learning is not always an easy thing, but I think it's good to have a clear picture of what you want to accomplish and then strive to move there and to recognize your limitations and keep trying to get better. And to me, any little movement forward as a communicator is going to lead to a better life, better professional, but personal too. So to me, that's my response about better conversations. And it's just that I would love it if I was doing all those things really well, but I do think I'm better, and I think other people can get better too.
That's wonderful. What a great way to kind of bring our conversation to close. I've really appreciated this conversation. It's been a genuine conversation, and as usual, I learn a lot. And to borrow the phrase that you use, it does feel mutually humanizing. So I'm going to now just look at some of the questions, and I'm going to apologize to people because we're very lucky that we've got a great number of participants and quite a lot of questions. So with everybody's permission, I'm probably going to pick 2 or 3 that I think tie into the gist of what we've talked about. We've got here somebody called Stephanie have said, the one thing that I have to remember that coaching cycles can go slow and that it is worth the time it takes to make change. The question is, when do you feel a direct approach is appropriate? That's the question. Would you like to think about that? And I'll look at a few other questions in the meantime.
Well, I can answer that while you're looking. I would say not very often. But I think there are times when you feel, the way I think of it is when I talk, and maybe you see it differently, but when I talk as a coach with a teacher, I'm like a teacher talking to a teacher. I'm a peer. I don't have any more power in the conversation. I see us as equals. And so I would take the directive approach with a colleague the same as I would with a teacher who's teaching next door to me. If I heard someone saying something that they might not have been aware of, but that's racist or it demonstrates implicit bias, I think we need to call it out. Or if they do something that's damaging to kids, even in ways they might not know, we have to find the courage to call it out. In those cases, I'd be directive. And then I think there are, like, when it comes to things like expectations for students, I think there are times when we can say, I think they can do more, you know? Yeah. So I think it's sort of direct-ish. It's still not, I still am acknowledging you're going to do what you're going to do, yeah. But I make it clear this is how I see it. So most of the things that I would say are directive, you can handle them in a dialogical way. Because what I say is change always involves a choice, and telling the person they have to do it doesn't get rid of the choice. It just means probably they're less likely to choose it. So once you acknowledge that their change always involves a choice on the part of the person, then the dialogical approach makes sense.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Jim, for that. Just a little plug for the next one of these calls, the webinars, which will happen next week. I'm actually talking to my great colleague, Chris Monroe. He's managing director of our business in Australia and New Zealand. And we're actually going to be talking about the directive and non-directive during that call. So if I'll say a little bit more about it in that call as well. Jim, somebody's mentioned some of the books that we've referenced, whether it's possible to provide a reading list of the books that we might have mentioned on this call. So I think maybe we can do that via Twitter afterwards. We can just tweet out the books that have been mentioned. Okay, now Michael Fullan has a principle in his book, Nuance, Why Some Leaders Succeed and Others Fail. So this is from Dave Willard, which is culture-based accountability. I feel as though there is so much overlap between that principle and the part of this conversation about readiness for coaching. I'm curious about your thoughts on building this sort of accountability, the transformative effect it can have, and at how it may affect readiness for coaching.
Yeah, so I had a thought about that is I talk about accountability as always involving a choice. So my terms are not the same as Michael's, but I've heard him talk about those choices, but I talk about responsible accountability and irresponsible accountability. And so for me, a responsible accountability is one where you're committed and you've made a choice and you've made a decision, and you want to get a clear picture of current reality and you want to do it. Irresponsible accountability is I'm told I have to do it, so I'm going to do it. And the trouble with irresponsible accountability, understanding accountability is doing what you're told, is I don't have any responsibility, because I can say, well, it didn't work, but it's not my idea, it's your idea. So I want it to be my idea. I want it to be ownership. And I'm not sure if that's the same as culture-based accountability, but I think accountability that originates outside of me, outside of a commitment on my part, isn't going to be as powerful as accountability that originates within me. So if I look at a video of my class and I go, that's got to change, and I've got a coach who's making it easy for me to do the kind of changes, and I can see progress, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm completely committed, and then because I've hit that goal, I want to do another goal, that's a lot more powerful than the principal's going to come in and do a walkthrough and make sure I got my learning target on the blackboard. You know, that's my responsibility.
I agree with that. Excellent phrase. And the responsible accountability is probably what coaching is all about, generating responsible accountability. And in the cultural context, I think the school leadership team and everybody in the school can help with that by creating a culture where there's high expectations, there's a focus on student outcomes, etc., which will motivate me. But I agree entirely with you, Jim, that that accountability has to start with myself, and I have to have that personal accountability needs to be important for me. And I think coaching is all about those kinds of conversations. So excellent. There's a lot of excellent questions here. Here's one from Alex Gorman. Hi, Alex. Alex, a good colleague of ours in Sydney. She says, Christian and Jim, how has this journey changed you as people in your personal lives? So we can spend another hour on this, Jim.
You go ahead.
Personally, I think I'm a very different person as a result of learning how to become a coach. And I'll just pick two examples. One is, I think I'm less judgmental than I was. I think I was quite judgmental. And I think to be a good coach, I learned not to be judgmental. And there's a little phrase, a little mantra that I told myself when I first noticed I was becoming a little bit judgmental. And an example from the kind of professional practice we talk about is, let's say I'm coaching an educator and they say something that makes me think, oh, well, maybe you should be doing a bit more of that. Those were the moments that I'd noticed I'm becoming a little bit judgmental. And the little phrase I told myself is, I would tell myself silently is, and it's okay. That was a little phrase. So I would notice something this person doesn't seem to be that bothered about, I don't know, planning, and that's okay, because and I think that's okay, I use in my personal life as well. When I notice I'm getting a little bit irritated about something, or I just think, okay, I'm just noticing that person has a different view from me, and that's okay because I respect them. And so that would probably be one thing that's significantly different for me. And the other is just in terms of, just the initial inclination of wanting to know more about a situation before the solution pops into my mind. Because I used to pride myself on, I can think up solutions pretty quickly. I'm pretty good at coming up with solutions. I think coaching has taught me, that's probably my solution. And so I don't actually like this phrase anymore of, if I were in your shoes kind of thing. People do say that to me. My initial reaction now is, well, you're actually not in my shoes. I do think that coaching is a coach trying to show that I'm trying to understand what it's like to be in your shoes, but I won't, because they're your shoes and you've been wearing them. You know what it's like to be in your shoes. And I think the best we can get to is, I'm trying to guess. I've got shoes as well. I've walked in shoes for a little while, so but I don't know what it's like. So those are things that have changed in my personal life as well. What about you, Jim?
I don't, I didn't have a great childhood in many ways. And I was privileged. I grew up in the Western world, and we weren't, we grew up on a farm, but we weren't poor. But, I didn't have a lot of, I had loving parents, but there were challenges in my home. And so when I left home and sort of struck out on my own, went to university and so forth, initially I kind of failed at university, and I had a kind of transformative experience climbing mountains in Banff and Jasper. There was something about just climbing to the top of a mountain and getting to the top that really developed my efficacy. So I went back to university and was really successful, got a really hard to get scholarship in Canada. In part because of Michael's letter of reference. But I think, your history shapes you. If you're around verbal abuse, it's going to rub off on you. And if you're around things that affect your efficacy, it's going to be hard to feel confident. And I think the work, partnership principles, but more importantly, understanding the importance of trying to do good for other people. I think, all the work I've read about the attitude of benevolence and trying to do those things has moved me a ways down the road towards, I'm not, I hope, overbearingly confident. But I want to learn. I want to hear when things don't go well, but I feel like I'm grounded. I know more or less what I want to do. And then in terms of the work I've done, writing Better Conversations, one of the best things I ever did because it taught me a lot. And then every time I have a chance to share Better Conversations, it reminds me of it and it moves me forward. But the trouble with Better Conversations or any kind of approach on conversations is we are unaware of what we're doing wrong. And so we have to have these moments that wake us up and move us forward. And, I had one just a few weeks ago where I said, oh, I'm not doing what I need to do. So I guess the way to put it is I used to be a real jerk and now I'm not quite as bad a jerk as I thought I was. So I think it's helped me in terms of the grounding for the work I do. It's helped me improve as a communicator, but I have a long way to go to get to be the person I want to be. But I guess it's good that I know where I want to go. I don't know what would have, if I hadn't done this work, if I had just kept teaching English, like you, I did my doctorate in English, did my comps, but then I switched to education. You did your doctorate in Shakespeare.
Yeah.
If I just kept writing English and kind of being envious of other researchers and all that, I don't know that I would have been able to. I think the things I read and the people I met and the work I've done have helped me have a better life. Still not where I want to be, but I think I've grown a lot, and that's how I'd see it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. And thank you for that honesty and the kind of demonstrating the kind of vulnerability that we talk about in coaching. I appreciate that. And I'm guessing everybody watching is also appreciating it. There are other questions as well, but I want to make sure we're done on time. We've got another 3 minutes. So it might be worth just wrapping up the conversation now. Rachel Lofthouse's comment is around the conference, and she's very much looking forward to that. We think it'll be in November. We're coming back to the reality of the challenging times we're in. It's difficult to make very firm commitments, but Rachel Lofthouse and her team at Leeds Beckett University, they're doing amazing work, and they're going to be doing their best to offer a continuing professional development event in November. And that'll be an opportunity to carry on with some of these conversations as well. Jim, I just want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. It's been a genuine pleasure, as always, to talk to you. I'm grateful for everybody who's joined the call. I see there's people from all over the world, and many of you have asked questions and commented. So, and many of these comments are very positive and encouraging. So I'm grateful to you for your comments and your questions. Finally, thank you very much, Jim.
Christian, thank you. As always, I appreciate the chance to talk, and I'm grateful for what I'm learned from you, even much more grateful for our friendship and the friendship with John Campbell, who would be nice to have him involved too. He's been a great friend.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And hopefully John will be on one of these conversations in the coming weeks and months. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the educators who are watching live or who might be watching later. If you want to know a little bit more about GCI or Instructional Coaching Group, you can visit our websites. There's a lot of free resources on there at the moment, so please take advantage of that. So thank you very much, everyone, and it's lovely talking to you. Take care. Thanks, Jim. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Jim.